Hey guys, tonight we're rolling back the clock. Not just a few years, not a few centuries, but deep into a world where the price of simply waking up each morning was almost more than most could pay. You stir from sleep, not on a mattress, but atop a flattened pile of straw, itchy and poking through your homespun tunic. There's a heavy chill, the kind that settles into your bones overnight, and you can hear the faint rustle of mice somewhere under the floorboards. The roof beams creak above your head, maybe letting through the ghost of last night's rain, and you're reminded again, before you've even sat up, how little separates you from the sky. You blink, and for a second you forget the hunger. But it's there, a quiet ache in your belly, the kind of ache that's more common than comfort in these parts. Most mornings your first task isn't checking your notifications. It's wondering whether the bread sack has anything left or if the chickens managed to lay one lonely egg. As you sit up, you realize you've survived another night. A win, frankly, because you probably won't survive this era for long. The odds are not in your favor. So, before we go any further, if this quiet space makes you feel even a little less alone, you can like the video and subscribe, but only if it feels right to your heart. And hey, I'd love to know where you're listening from. Are you lying awake in a quiet room at 2 a.m.? Or maybe starting your day in a rainy city? Eyes still heavy? Drop your time and place in the comments. Let's remind each other we're not alone out here. Now, dim the lights, let your shoulders relax, and let's begin tonight's slow, strange journey together here on Timeless Sleep. You pull yourself upright. Your feet find the dirt floor, gritty and cold. There are no carpets, no slippers, just bare toes meeting the earth. Unless you're one of the lucky few who own shoes. Even those, if you have them, are probably worn through at the heel, patched with bits of scrap leather, or handed down so many times they remember more footsteps than you do. Somewhere outside, a rooster crows not a gentle wake-up call, but a rasping sound that says, "Get up, work waits," whether you're ready or not. In a medieval world, waking up poor isn't a phase, it's a default setting. Your family shares a single room, often with siblings piled together like puppies for warmth. If your house is in the village, you might live in a simple wattle and daub cottage, wooden posts filled in with sticks, plastered with mud, and roofed with thatch that leaks whenever the weather is in a bad mood. If you're in town, your room is probably cramped, wedged above or behind a shop, sharing thin walls with neighbors you hear more than you see. The air smells of wood smoke from the hearth if you have one, or sometimes peat or dung if you're poorer still. You sniff your sleeve, half wishing for the scent of flowers, half expecting the sour tang of sweat. It's not that you're dirty on purpose, it's that water is heavy to haul, firewood is dear, and soap is a luxury. You do what you can, but even the lords and ladies upstairs have days where the grime wins out. It's not all grim though. There's a sort of camaraderie in this morning ritual. A knowledge that everyone around you is in the same boat, except of course for the truly wealthy. But the rich are a rumour, glimpsed only at a distance, their comfort as unattainable as the stars. In your world, wealth means something as simple as extra bread or an old blanket that hasn't been eaten by moths. As you step outside, the world is waking too. The mist hugs the ground, chickens scratch at the yard, and your breath puffs white in the cool air. If it's spring or summer, maybe you feel the promise of the day, long hours to work the fields, the sun that warms your face, a chance at a little extra grain for the winter ahead. If it's winter, every step outside feels like a dare. Can you make it through another day with what you've got? Remember, in this time, there's no backup plan. If your roof caves in or your field floods, there's no insurance, no GoFundMe. You survive by the strength of your hands and often the kindness or desperation of your neighbors. And that straw mattress? It's not a detail, it's a daily reality. Historians still argue whether peasants' bedding was more straw, rushes, or even bracken, depending on where you lived. What's certain is that comfort was always a compromise, and those with real mattresses, stuffed with feathers, might as well have been sleeping on clouds, as far as you're concerned. Let's be honest, most mornings you wake up tired. Not just sleepy, but tired in a way that's hard to shake, the kind of tired that comes from years of hunger, cold, and hard work. Your joints ache, Maybe you have a cough you can't shake and your hands are rough from the fields or the forge. And yet, you get up. You have to, because the cost of lying in is a day's wages lost. And in this world, missing a day's work can mean missing a meal, or worse. There are moments of humor here, strange as it sounds, like the way everyone develops the art of strategic stretching, carefully inching out from the communal heap without waking the baby or stepping on someone's face, or the time the village dog stole your only sock and you spent a week with one cold foot, convinced he was taunting you, and the early morning gossip whispered from bed to bed, swapping stories of dreams, last night's weather, and who saw what mysterious light out on the road. If you're a servant or apprentice in someone else's house, your morning starts even earlier. You're up before the family, tending to fires, fetching water, or making sure the animals are fed. The cost here isn't just in money, it's in time, energy, and a slice of your freedom. The rich might have a little more leisure, but even they are at the mercy of the sunrise, the seasons, and the whims of fortune. The first thing you notice every morning is what's missing. A missing loaf of bread, a missing hen, foxes again, a missing neighbor who slipped away in the night, debts unpaid. In medieval towns, records show that even missing people were tallied up every morning, part of the ongoing struggle to keep everyone accounted for in a world where disappearing could mean anything from illness to running off to join a monastery. There's always a price to pay, even in sleep. You wake stiff because you shared your straw with a brother who wet the bed, and now you're bargaining for the driest corner. You wake anxious because today's the day the landlord comes by, and you're not sure you have enough to cover the rent. Sometimes the only comfort is the sound of your family breathing beside you, proof that you made it through the night together. Some fringe tales linger in the early morning quiet, like the one about the local wise woman who claimed sleeping with garlic under your pillow would keep away both nightmares and rats, or the story of the knight who slept on bare boards to toughen himself up for battle, only to limp for weeks from the bruises. The truth is, everyone had their own tricks for making morning less miserable, whether it worked or not. As you get ready for the day, you take stock. Do you have enough fuel for the fire? Is there clean water to drink? Has anything spoiled or gone missing overnight? Even the act of getting dressed is an exercise in budgeting. You weigh the need for warmth against the risk of wearing out your only tunic too soon. And if you're one of the very unlucky, waking up poor isn't even inside a house. There are beggars, widows, wanderers who curl up in stables, under eaves, or in the ruins outside town, hoping for shelter from the wind. For them, every sunrise is a gamble. It's not all gloom, though. There's a strange, shared resilience here. The smell of baking bread if you're lucky enough to have flour. The sound of neighbors laughing as they greet the day. The way sunlight finds its way through even the narrowest cracks in the wall. You learn to cherish small things. The warmth of the hearth, the taste of a stolen apple, the unexpected comfort of a cat curled against your feet. So you rise, shake the straw from your hair, and get ready to face another day. You know you'll be tired, you'll be hungry, you'll probably laugh at something ridiculous because humor is as necessary as bread. And as you step out into the grey light, you remind yourself that the cost of living isn't just paid in coins, it's paid in sweat, in hope, in the stubborn insistence to greet another dawn, no matter what it brings. You shuffle across the cold floorboards or hard-packed dirt, heart already weighing the chances that you'll get anything to eat this morning. Breakfast, as you might picture it today, a warm mug, maybe something toasted, perhaps a little fruit, is not an assumption in this world. In fact, the idea of a guaranteed morning meal is a privilege so rare most people living in the Middle Ages would hear the word breakfast and raise an eyebrow, perhaps suspecting you've just invented a new form of luxury. Here, breaking the fast is exactly what it sounds like, an act, not a habit. A hopeful pause when you might finally taste something, after hours of nothing but air and whatever dreams your stomach managed to conjure up. For most, the only certainty is that hunger will wake before you do, and follow you through every waking hour. If there is bread left from yesterday, a coarse, rough loaf dense as a brick and twice as heavy, it might be waiting on the table, its surface already hardened by the night's cold. If not, well, you start your day on water or a thin ale, a drink that's more safety precaution than celebration. You rub sleep from your eyes, wishing you could rub away the hunger too. The kitchen, if your house even has such a thing, is little more than a smoky hearth, a battered iron pot, and a few wooden bowls stacked in the corner. No gleaming rows of eggs or baskets of fresh produce here, just what little you have left after yesterday's meals, sometimes only a heel of bread or a spoonful of peas. Even the nobility, those mysterious folk with money to spare, often start their day with little more than stale bread dipped in watered-down wine, a ritual more about waking up the palate than feeding the body. You look around at your family, faces are pinched, eyes hopeful, and the conversation is sparse. What is there to talk about, except what you don't have? You hear your mother sigh as she checks the cupboard, her hand closing on nothing. Your little brother picks at the table, as if maybe, just maybe, crumbs will magically appear. It's not tragic, exactly, it's simply routine. Hunger is an old friend, a companion you've learned to joke about, even as it gnaws away in the background, day after day. Some mornings are better. Maybe last night you were lucky, a neighbor shared an onion, or a passing peddler left behind a wedge of cheese in exchange for a mended shoe. On those rare days, you eat with a kind of reverence, each bite chewed slowly, savored, as if it might be your last for a while. A crust of bread with a bit of honey as the stuff of legends. You've heard rumors that kings eat eggs every day, that some people in distant lands start their mornings with sweet pastries and bowls of creamy porridge. But these tales might as well be fairy tales. Breakfast is an unpredictable guest. Some mornings you go out early, skipping food entirely. You hurry to the fields or the workshop, hoping that work will distract you from your rumbling stomach, or maybe the master will share a little of his meal with you later on. Historians still argue whether medieval laborers actually had set meal times or simply ate whenever they could. One thing is clear, nobody took food for granted. You learn to live with uncertainty, to savor every unexpected treat, and to accept disappointment with a wry smile. If you're a child, there's a certain excitement in the daily hunt for breakfast. Maybe you sneak outside, scanning the ground for early berries or the odd forgotten apple. Sometimes, you gather wild greens or catch a frog frogs the stream. Some village boys tell stories about snack thieves, the foxes and crows, who always seem to beat you to the best finds. You laugh because even the animals know that in the medieval world, food is worth fighting for. There are moments of levity, like the day someone tried to stretch a single egg to feed 5 people, scrambled so thin it became more rumor than meal. Or the time your sister snuck a piece of cheese from the Lord's kitchen, and you both had to pretend you didn't smell like dairy or weak. People in these times become creative, boiling old bones to make weak broth, turning dried peas into something vaguely edible, or pretending that a pinch of salt makes everything taste like meat. Sometimes a neighbor knocks on your door, asking for a scrap of bread or a bit of lard. You share what you have, even when it hurts, because tomorrow you might be the one doing the asking. Charity is a survival tool, not a virtue to boast about. You learn to stretch a meal until it's almost invisible, making enough for everyone by simply lowering your standards. There are fringe solutions too. Old wives whisper about making a breakfast porridge from chestnut flour, or acorns, bitter but filling if you know how to prepare it right. Some travelers claim that a soup made with nettles will give you strength for the day, while others swear by a hunk of cheese wrapped in cloth, hidden away for special mornings. You hear too about families who ate clay mixed with water in desperate times, believing it would fill their bellies when nothing else was left. Desperation breeds invention, even if the results aren't exactly delicious. You learn the rhythms of hunger, how to save a little from one meal for the next, how to avoid the shame of asking for help if you can. The local priest might give alms, bread to the truly poor, on holy days, but there are more mouths than loaves. Every crumb is precious, every meal an achievement. If you're lucky, you get used to the taste of hunger. If you're not, it breaks you. Some days you walk to work on an empty stomach, the world already spinning a little as you push through the morning chores. By noon, if you're fortunate, someone will call you in for a proper meal, though even this is usually thin soup, some more bread, and on a festival, a piece of salted pork. You can't help but daydream about real breakfasts, the kind you've heard described in stories: meat pies, fresh fruit, cream poured over hot oats. You wonder if those stories were ever true or just wishful thinking, and still, you find ways to laugh, like when the village idiot tries to eat his own shoes, or when you and your friends compete to see who can find the ugliest mushroom for breakfast. Humor is hunger's companion. You need it, because without it, the days are simply too long. On certain feast days, breakfast becomes a celebration. The whole village might come together to share what little they have, sometimes bread and ale, sometimes a rare bit of fruit, maybe even a pie if the harvest was good. These are the mornings you remember. Long after the hunger returns, you recall the taste of honey on your tongue, the sticky sweetness of a stolen plum, the warm comfort of knowing, for once, that everyone's belly is full. Still, the costs remain high. You remember the time your neighbor lost her husband and the family went days without a meal, relying on the kindness of others to survive, or the stories told around the fire of men who risk their lives poaching rabbits from the Lord's land, only to be caught and punished. The consequences of hunger are as real as the ache in your belly. They shape every part of your day. There are fringe debates among historians about how many meals medieval people really ate. Some say it was two, one in late morning, one in the evening. Others argue that in lean times a single meal had to stretch the whole day. The truth probably depends on where you lived, how hard the times were, and how much luck you carried. What's certain is this: the idea of 3 square meals is as distant as the moon. And so you begin each day with hope, with hunger, with a kind of stubborn optimism. Maybe today there will be enough.
Maybe tonight you'll go to bed with a full stomach.
And if not, you know you'll find a way to laugh about it, because sometimes laughter is all that keeps you going. You count your blessings, what few there are, and remind yourself that you're not alone in this. Everyone in your world wakes hungry. Everyone learns to survive. If you happen to be in a monastery, the story changes a little. Monks rise before dawn for prayers, breaking their fast only after hours of labor and worship. Even then, the meal is modest. Maybe some bread, a little cheese, and weak ale, all eaten in silence. There's an odd comfort in the routine, a sense of purpose that makes hunger easier to bear. You've heard that monks sometimes steal extra food from the kitchen, hiding apples in their sleeves to eat later by candlelight. You can't blame them. Hunger knows no vows. A few privileged folk, the lords and ladies in their manors, might start their day with more white bread, delicate pastries, even a little fruit in season. But these luxuries come at a price, and not just in coins. The kitchen staff rise even earlier than the family, working in the dark to prepare breakfast, risking burns and scoldings if things aren't perfect. And even here, food can run out. A late shipment, a failed crop, a mouse in the pantry. Hunger, you see, is the great equalizer. There's a kind of freedom in all this. When you're hungry, you focus on what matters. You don't waste time on petty grievances or pointless luxuries. You learn to find joy in the smallest things: a crumb of cheese, a sip of warm ale, the sound of laughter in the morning. You realize that in this world, breakfast isn't just about food, it's about survival, about community, about finding light in the darkness. So you start your day the only way you can, hoping for the best, prepared for the worst, and always ready to laugh at the absurdity of it all. Maybe one day you'll wake to find the bread basket full, the pot bubbling with stew, and the world just a little less hungry. Until then, you make do, you share what you have, and you remind yourself that every meal, no matter how small, is worth celebrating. You slip into your clothes as the morning mist clings to the fields outside, if that is, you even have clothes to slip into. There's no overflowing wardrobe, no closet bulging with choices, no running a comb through your outfit of the day. You look down at your tunic, woven from coarse wool or linen, a far cry from anything soft or sleek. Maybe your mother spun the yarn herself, or perhaps it was handed down by an older sibling, patched at the elbows, faded by sun and soap. The sleeves are a little short, but you make do, rolling them up as you knead bread or haul water. Clothes aren't about fashion, they're about survival. Their primary job, keep you warm, dry, and as protected from the world as a few layers of fabric can. The price of clothing in this world is enough to make you shudder. Textiles are expensive, really expensive. Most people simply can't afford new clothes. Every thread matters. Even the dyes used to color your tunic come at a premium. Blue from woad, red from madder, yellow from weld or saffron. Only the rich can afford true bright colors. For the rest, it's dull browns, greys, and muddy greens. Hues that blend in with the earth and fields. Historians still argue whether peasants deliberately chose these colors or simply took what they could get. Some say there was pride in wearing a new undyed tunic. Others believe people would have given anything for a flash of blue or red if only their wallets agreed. Your shoes, if you own any, are simple and rough. Leather cut by hand, stitched with sinew or thread, sometimes patched with wood or even cloth if times are especially hard. And shoes wear out fast. The damp, the mud, the cobblestones of the village all conspire to turn even the best pair into little more than scraps in a matter of months. That's why barefoot is so mom. Children run through the lanes with calloused feet, and grown men work in the fields shoeless, their soles toughened by years of hard ground. Underwear is a fantasy for most. The idea of a special undergarment, something soft, perhaps even clean, sounds almost comical. For some, a simple linen shirt or shift serves as the only barrier between skin and outer garment, washed as often as you can spare the soap and water. For women, it's much the same. A chemise often threadbare, sometimes doubled up in winter, always in danger of wearing thin in all the wrong places. Some joke that if you're cold, just put on more courage. It'll have to do. Belts, laces, and fasteners are precious too. A simple leather belt can cost more than you earn in a week. Buckles are rarer still, often handed down like heirlooms, sometimes scavenged from broken tools or cast-off armor. You tie your clothes together with strips of cloth, bits of rope, anything you can find. Buttons are for the rich. You get by with ties and knots. There's always the possibility of hand-me-downs, clothes passed from brother to sister, uncle to niece, neighbor to neighbor. You might inherit a cloak that smells faintly of wood smoke, or a tunic patched with fabric from a dozen different origins. Every stitch tells a story. You might even wear a piece that belonged to someone now long gone, a strange comfort or maybe a reminder that nothing lasts forever, not even wool and linen. If you're a servant or apprentice, you probably wear livery clothing in the colors or badge of your employer. It's a mark of your station, both a point of pride and a reminder that your body and your clothes are someone else's property. At least it means you get fresh clothes once in a while, even if they're stiff, ill-fitting, and scratchy. The cost of keeping your clothes clean is another story. Soap, made from animal fat and lye, is precious. Some say washing with it makes you cleaner, but not everyone agrees. It can be harsh, even ruin fabric. Most days you simply rinse your tunic in cold water, beating it against a stone if it's really filthy, then hang it to dry in the sun. There's a certain pride in being clean enough, a standard that would baffle anyone used to modern washing machines and detergents. You do what you can, and try not to stand downwind if you've skipped a wash or two. In town you might have access to a professional fuller, someone whose job it is to clean and thicken woolen cloth by pounding it with water and clay or urine. Yes, you heard that right. Urine. It's not glamorous, but it gets the job done. Sometimes you see the fullers, their hands cracked and red, their noses accustomed to the stench, and you're grateful you're not in their line of work. If you live near a monastery or nunnery, there's a better chance you'll have access to charity clothes. Monks and nuns sometimes distribute old habits to the poor, or organize cloth alms where the neediest can get a fresh tunic before winter sets in. Of course, the queue is long and the supply short, so you never count on it. There are light-hearted moments, even in the drudgery of medieval dress, like the time your friend tried to impress the village girls by dyeing his shirt with beet juice. only to end up with pink arms and a sour smell, or the story of the girl who patched her skirt so many times the original fabric vanished entirely, leaving only a quilt of memories, or when someone sewed a secret pocket into their tunic and forgot where they put it, spending months patting themselves down in search of a lost coin. You make do, and sometimes you make fashion. A well-placed sash, a flower tucked behind the ear, a new way to tie a scarf. You might braid your hair, or, if you're feeling bold, shave it off to avoid lice. Every little detail is a chance to assert a bit of personality in a world where clothes are mostly about survival. There's always the risk of disaster. A fire, a flood, or a run-in with the local livestock can destroy months of careful patching in an instant. When disaster strikes, you beg, borrow, or steal new clothes, or wrap yourself in whatever you can find. Old sacks, scraps from the weaver, cast-offs from the graveyard of forgotten garments. There are stories, too, of women sewing coins into their hems for safety, or of thieves making off with a single shoe, leaving someone to hobble home barefoot and furious. And of course, if you're really unlucky, your clothes become a source of shame. Rags mark you as poor, a target for ridicule or pity. In some towns, there are even laws about what you can and cannot wear, the infamous sumptuary laws. These rules are meant to keep the classes separate, forbidding the lower orders from wearing certain colors, fabrics, or styles reserved for the rich. Historians still debate how strictly these laws were enforced, but you know one thing: the wrong tunic at the wrong time can get you in trouble. Best to keep your head down and your clothes as unremarkable as possible. Even the wealthy have their own clothing dilemmas. Rich fabrics like silk and velvet must be imported, costing a small fortune. Bright dyes like Tyrian purple, made from crushed sea snails, are the ultimate status symbol, but ruinously expensive. Fashions change, and woe betide the lady who shows up to a feast in last season's sleeves. There's a whole economy of tailors, weavers, dyers, and peddlers who make their living from the endless desire for something new, something finer. Shoes are no easier. High-born ladies might have delicate slippers, but even they trip on muddy roads or find themselves splashing through puddles in their best finery. Some noblemen commission armoured shoes, more for show than for comfort. There are tales of lords whose boots were so heavy and ornate, they needed servants to help them walk. You, meanwhile, count your blessings if you can patch your old boots one more time. Maybe you stuff the toes with wool to keep out the cold, or line the soles with moss if you're desperate. Some folks even make shoes from woven reeds, good for a season if you're lucky. Your relationship with clothing becomes intimate, practical, and deeply personal. Each stain is a memory, each patch a small victory over the world's rough edges. You learn to love the feel of sun-warmed wool on your shoulders, the protection of a thick cloak on a stormy day, the simple satisfaction of mending something broken. But there's always an underlying cost. Every hour spent spinning, weaving, dyeing, sewing, and patching is an hour not spent in the fields or with your family. Every coin saved for a new cloak is a coin not spent on food. The choice is rarely easy. Humor helps. When your friend shows up to church in a tunic 2 sizes too small, you try not to snicker. When the Lord's Son rides through town in velvet so bright it scares the geese, you shake your head. When someone dares to wear red shoes on a festival day, a color reserved for the nobility, you all pretend not to notice. But the story spreads faster than gossip at the bakehouse. And yet, for all its hardships, there's a strange pride in making do, in finding beauty in a hand-stitched seam, in feeling the weight of a well-mended cloak, in knowing your clothes have survived almost as much as you have. You stand in the morning light, adjust your patched belt, and tell yourself that, in the medieval world, style is survival. You step outside bundled in your patched cloak or threadbare tunic, and the morning air nips at your cheeks. Your home is not much of a fortress, it's more like a fragile promise against the world's worst moods. The truth is, shelter in medieval times is not so much a haven as a daily negotiation with the elements, the landlord, and the very limits of what a few sticks and mud can withstand. Your family's house is small, so small that if you take 3 steps from your straw mattress, you're already at the hearth. The walls are made of wattle and daub, slender saplings woven together, then smothered with a mix of mud, straw, dung, and maybe a little luck. The roof is thatch, yellowed and prickly, layered thick to shed the rain but always on the verge of sprouting weeds or inviting in the birds. On the best days, the roof just leaks. On the worst, it collapses, drenching your bedding and spoiling your stored grain in one miserable downpour. Most families live in a single room. There is no privacy. Your siblings, parents, and sometimes even a stray grandparent or two all sleep, eat, and argue within earshot. At night you pile close together for warmth, sometimes 3 or 4 to a bed, or simply spread out on the rushes, each hoping you're not the unlucky one nearest the draughty door. In winter, the only heat comes from a small fire in the hearth, the smoke curling up through a hole in the roof or, if you're poor, lingering in the air and burning your eyes. The cost of this shelter is not counted in coins alone, though, if you rent your cottage, the landlord comes knocking every Martinmas, eager for his due. Sometimes it's a few pennies, other times it's a portion of your barley harvest, or the best hen from your coop. If you live in a town, your quarters are no better. Space is at a premium, so you cram into cramped houses built tall and narrow, often leaning out over the street in a way that looks more precarious than comfortable. The walls are thin, your neighbours are loud, and the smells of cooking, washing, and the occasional chamber pot drift freely through the cracks. If you're a shopkeeper, your bed is likely squeezed behind the counter or up a rickety ladder, sharing space with sacks of grain or bundles of wool. But you make do. There's a strange intimacy to these tiny spaces, a closeness that means you never have to look far for help or for someone to share your worries with. Even when tempers flare, even when the baby's wailing or the roof leaks onto your best blanket, there is comfort in knowing that everyone around you is facing the same struggle. Still, there's a pecking order. The richest families in the village might have 2 rooms, maybe even a loft above the main floor, where the children can sleep away from the adults. Some have stone cottages, rare and precious, their walls thick enough to keep out the worst of the cold. These homes are the envy of all, solid, dry, and often handed down for generations. If you're a serf tied to the land, your lord might provide a cottage, but don't expect luxury. The roof will still leak, the drafts will still find their way under the door, and you will still be responsible for every repair, every fresh coat of mud, every new handful of straw. Some families, especially in the cities, live above their animals. Cows, pigs, or chickens take up the ground floor, their warmth rising up through the floorboards to help heat the rooms above. It's not glamorous, and the smell can be formidable. But when the winter winds howl, you're grateful for every extra degree of warmth the livestock provide. If you live near a river, flooding is a constant threat. One bad storm, and you could lose your bedding, your food stores, even your walls if the water rises high enough. There are always stories in the village of someone whose house floated away, or who spent the night on the roof clutching a chicken and praying the rain would stop. Historians still argue whether medieval villagers spent more time repairing their homes or simply accepting the leaks, the drafts, and the occasional collapse as part of life. Some records show entire communities coming together for a roofing bee, where everyone pitches in to help rethatch a neighbor's house before the next storm. Others suggest that many simply learned to live with wet feet, shivering through the winter and patching up holes in the spring. Then there are the truly unlucky, the wanderers, the widows, the orphaned children, who have no home at all. They sleep in barns, under hedges, or in the ruins of old buildings, sheltering under scraps of cloth or whatever dry corner they can find. For them, even the draftiest, muddiest cottage would be a dream. Your home, such as it is, becomes the center of your universe. It's where you cook your meager meals, huddle against the cold, and share stories in the evening darkness. Every corner holds a memory, the wall where your father patched a hole with an old shoe, the hearth where your mother taught you to make porridge, the window, if you have one, that rattles in the wind and lets in just enough light to read by. And let's not forget about pests. Mice, rats, and all manner of bugs make their homes in the walls, in the straw mattresses, and even under your pillow if you're not careful. Cats are cherished not for their cuteness, but for their skill as mousers. You learn to ignore the scurrying in the night, the occasional nibble at your bread stores, the faint itch of a flea bite as you drift off to sleep. Sometimes your home is attacked by more than just the weather, a passing band of soldiers, a roaming wolf, a neighbor with a grudge. Any one of these can leave you scrambling to repair a broken door or replace a stolen chicken. There's a dark humor to the way your fortunes can change overnight. One storm, one raid, and you go from warm and dry to homeless and hungry in the blink of an eye. You get creative. When the roof leaks, you set out pots and pans to catch the drips. When the cold sneaks in, you hang spare rags over the door, stuff the cracks with moss or hay, and huddle together for warmth. There's always talk in the village about who has the best tricks for keeping out the weather. Some swear by burning herbs in the hearth to drive away dampness. Others tell stories of magical charms hung above the door to keep away storms. For all its flaws, your house is more than just shelter. It's a point of pride, a measure of your family's resilience. You brag about how many winters the walls have stood, how well your father built the frame, how clever your mother was at patching the roof. Even as the rain trickles down the inside of the wall, you remind yourself that you have a place to call home, no matter how humble. There are, of course, the castles and manor houses, grand and imposing, with walls of stone and roofs of slate. But for most people, these are as distant as fairy tales. You might see them on the horizon, shimmering in the morning light, but you're unlikely to ever step foot inside. These places have their own problems: cold stone, drafty halls, and servants who spend their days lugging wood and water just to keep the fires burning. But compared to your cottage, they are palaces. You might hear rumors of new building methods: a house with a tiled roof, a floor paved with stone, a window made from glass instead of oiled cloth or wooden shutters. But these are rare luxuries, reserved for the wealthiest townsfolk or the lucky few who inherit a truly sturdy home. Even the city dwellers, crammed into tenements that lean and sway like drunkards after a feast, know the anxiety of shelter. Fires can race through a town in minutes, leaving hundreds homeless in the wake of a single spark. There are stories of whole neighborhoods rebuilt after a blaze, the new houses even more precarious than the last. Everyone hoping that next time the flames will pass them by. Your house is both your protection and your prison. When the weather turns, you hunker down, hoping the walls will hold. When times are good, you might invite a neighbor in to share a meal, or celebrate a festival with music and laughter that spills out into the lane. But always, at the back of your mind, is the knowledge that this fragile shelter is only temporary, a bulwark against the world that could crumble at any moment. There's humor too in the endless cycle of repairs. The story of the villager who used his wife's best dress to plug a hole in the roof, or the family who painted their door red every spring, convinced it would keep out the rain and the tax collector, or the old woman who swore her cottage never leaked because she welcomed the fairies in, leaving out a saucer of milk each night. And still, you find ways to make it feel like home. A bunch of dried herbs hanging from the rafters, scrap of tapestry stitched from old clothes, a wooden carving set above the door to ward off evil spirits. Each detail is a defiance, a small, stubborn insistence that even the poorest shelter can be a place of comfort, laughter, and hope. So you close the door behind you, bracing against the wind, and remind yourself that no matter how fragile, how cramped, how leaky your house may be, it's yours. You will patch it. You will defend it. And when the rain stops and the sun comes out, you'll stand in the doorway and feel a quiet pride, knowing that you and your family have survived another storm together, under this little patch of thatch and mud. You push open the rickety door, heart set on some relief from the dryness of your mouth. Water, you'd think, should be free. It falls from the sky after all. But in the medieval world, nothing about drinking is simple, and even less about it is safe. Every sip has its cost, whether measured in coins, in labor, or in risk. If you live in the country, the village well is your lifeline. Each morning you walk the rutted path with your wooden bucket, hoping you're not too late. Wells are gathering places not just for water but for gossip, deals, even the odd marriage proposal, although you're probably more interested in making sure no one drops a dead mouse in before your turn. You try not to think too hard about what's at the bottom of the well. The truth is, contamination is an ever-present danger. Village wells sit close to livestock pens and privies, meaning all manner of things seep into the groundwater. Illness spreads quickly, people whisper about bad airs and evil spirits, but you suspect it's more about the manure on your shoes than curses from the woods. Sometimes someone falls ill, a neighbor's child, the old woman who sells eggs. The priest might call it a fever, the healer might offer herbs, but everyone quietly wonders if the water's to blame. Some villages rely on streams or rivers instead. The running water feels cleaner, but even that's a gamble. Upstream, someone else's laundry, someone else's livestock, someone else's filth is washing in. There's a local joke: never drink downstream of a pig, but sometimes you don't have a choice. In summer, the stream dries to a trickle, and you find yourself scooping up water from puddles, hoping the taste of mud is the worst thing you'll have to swallow. If you're really unlucky, you might find yourself drinking rainwater caught in barrels or even puddles in the street. Some say rainwater is purer, but everyone knows a careless bucket can breed sickness. You remember last winter when half the village was laid up with the bloody flux, and the doctor muttered about foul barrels and bad habits. You've learned to check for dead insects, to strain out bits of thatch, to say a quick prayer before taking a sip. That's why, for most people, water isn't the drink of choice. Ale is safer, at least, safer than the alternative. Brewing transforms water into something less likely to make you sick. The fermentation kills off most of the nasty things, and even a weak small ale, barely alcoholic, often given to children, is less risky than the clearest well. Every household brews its own, a bubbling cauldron of grain, water, and whatever yeast drifts in from the air. The result isn't exactly delicious, but it keeps you hydrated and mostly out of danger. You drink ale with every meal, sometimes in place of a meal. It's common to see even toddlers sipping from a mug. The local tavern sells stronger stuff, but that's a luxury if you're lucky enough to have a spare coin. Some days the ale tastes sour, and you suspect your neighbor skimped on the hops. Other times it's surprisingly good, and you wonder if they found a new trick or just got lucky with the weather. Wine is another matter entirely. Unless you live in southern Europe or near a great monastery, wine is rare and expensive. It's imported, a luxury for lords and bishops, not for you. Sometimes on feast days, you might get a taste watered down, of course, and shared with as many people as possible. There are stories about peasants sneaking into vineyards to steal grapes, or about travelers watering down their wine until it's more a memory than a drink. For most, wine remains a distant rumor, something you might dream about but never taste. If you're desperate, there are other options. Cider, made from apples or pears, is popular in some regions, though you're never quite sure if last year's barrel is still good. There are tales of perry so strong it knocks you sideways, and of homebrewed spirits that double as medicine or poison. You've heard of people drinking broth made from herbs, or mixing honey and water to make a sweet, weak mead. Sometimes these drinks are just a way to use up what's left in the larder. Other times they're an excuse to celebrate. And then there's milk. If your family keeps a cow or a goat, you might be lucky enough to have fresh milk in the mornings. But milk spoils quickly, especially in the heat, and what's not drunk is soon turned into cheese or butter. Most of the time milk is reserved for children and the sick, and you watch enviously as your little sister drinks hers, leaving a white mustache behind. If you're a monk or nun, your drinking habits are shaped by the rules of your order. Some monasteries ban wine or strong ale, others allow it for medicinal purposes. You've heard of monks who smuggle in extra barrels for the abbot's table, or who secretly brew beer in the cloisters. There's even a story about a convent that accidentally invented blue cheese when a keg of ale went mouldy. Whether true or not, it's a favorite at every feast, but no matter what you drink, there's always a cost. You spend hours hauling water from the well, or money on a cup of ale at the tavern. You trade eggs for a flagon of cider, or work a day in the fields to earn a jug of weak wine. Sometimes you go thirsty, waiting for the rain to fill your barrels or for the brew to finish fermenting. There's always the risk that what you drink will make you sick or that it will run out entirely. There's a kind of humor in the daily struggle for a safe drink. Like the time your neighbor tried to brew ale with peas instead of barley and everyone spent the next day running for the bushes, or when the village dog fell into the well and the water tasted of wet fur for a week, or the yearly festival where someone inevitably tries to outdrink the priest, only to end up snoring in the hayloft before noon. Some fringe remedies circulate too. People swear by boiling water with a handful of sage or mint to keep away illness. Others insist on carrying a charm, a carved stone, a twist of copper wire, believed to sweeten any water it's dipped into. Historians still argue whether such practices made any real difference, but in a world where medicine is guesswork and faith, a little extra luck is always welcome. Cleanliness is a constant battle. You learn to live with the taste of earth and iron, to spit out the worst of the grit, to cherish the days when your drink is clear and cold. You watch for sickness, for the first signs of fever or cough, and hope that the healer's remedies work better this time than last. Even celebrations revolve around drink. At weddings, you might splurge on a barrel of good ale, that tastes sweeter for its rarity. At funerals, you pour a little wine onto the earth, hoping it carries your prayers upward. On feast days, you mix what little you have, ale, cider, even a spoonful of honey, into a communal cup, shared around the fire as everyone laughs and forgets, just for a moment, how hard it is to keep body and soul together. Some days you wonder what it would be like to live in a place where water is always clean, where the well never runs dry, where every drink is safe and sweet. But most of the time, you don't have the luxury to wonder. You drink what you have, you pray it's enough, and you carry on, one sip at a time. There are moments, even now, when you're grateful, when the water runs clear and cold, when the ale is just right, when a friend shares the last cup of cider at the end of a long day. You raise your mug, whatever it holds, and toast to another day survived, another thirst quenched, another small victory in the long hard fight of living in the medieval world. And as you wipe your mouth, set down your cup and head out to face the rest of your day, you're reminded that in this world, nothing is ever free. Not the water, not the ale, not even the hope that tomorrow's drink will be better than today's. Every drop is earned, sometimes in coins, sometimes in sweat, sometimes in silent, stubborn endurance. So you laugh at the absurdity, share what you have, and carry on. Because in the medieval world, the real cost of living isn't just counted in bread and roof beams, but in every careful sip, every cautious swallow, every grateful gulp. And if, just once, you get to drink your fill, well, that's a day worth remembering. You shoulder your way into the day, ready or at least resigned to do whatever it takes to earn your daily bread. In the medieval world, work is not just a means of survival, it's a force that shapes every hour, every muscle, every thought. There is no real weekend, no comfort in the idea of a minimum wage, no protection from the endless seesaw of feast and famine. Work is what keeps you alive, and it's what keeps you awake at night, worrying if you'll have enough to scrape by tomorrow. The rooster's crow is your alarm clock, and by the time the sun is peeking over the rooftops, you're already deep in chores. Maybe you're a field worker, trudging out into the muddy dawn to sow barley or pull weeds. Your hands are rough from the plough, your back aches from bending and lifting, and your feet are cold from the dew that clings to the grass. If you live in town, your work is no less grueling, though it might be a little more varied. Blacksmiths start their forges before sunrise, the clang of hammer on anvil ringing through the streets. Bakers are up even earlier, kneading dough in the dark so that others might buy a loaf at sunrise. Weavers, cobblers, tanners, potters, each tradesman guards his craft with the secrecy of a magician. Every skill a closely kept secret passed down from parent to child. You don't just work for yourself, you work for the future of your bloodline, hoping to pass on a skill, a shop, a single tool that might give your children an edge in this relentless world. Your pay is a penny, sometimes less, and often not even in coin. For most, barter is the norm. You trade eggs for firewood, a pot of ale for a day's labour, a loaf of bread for a mended cloak. On rare occasions, A coin passes through your hands, heavy and cold, stamped with the face of a king you'll never meet. You might turn it over in your palm, thinking of all the things it could buy: a new knife, a little salt, maybe a cup of good ale at the market. But coins have a way of vanishing, paid out in rents, tithes, tolls, or for a doctor's visit when someone falls ill. It's easy to romanticize the idea of a simpler time, but the reality is that every scrap of comfort is hard won. You watch the seasons, pray for good weather, and curse the years when frost, flood, or drought ruin the harvest. When times are good, you save what little you can: a jar of honey, a handful of beans, maybe even a coin tucked away in a secret spot. But most years, there's nothing left to save. You live day to day, feast to famine, always bracing for the next disaster. There's a rough humor among workers, a way to cope with the endless slog. Someone might joke that they'd sell their soul for a second pair of shoes, or bet a week's wages that the landlord's pig is fatter than the Lord himself. The jokes don't make the work easier, but they make it bearable, turning exhaustion into camaraderie. Sometimes you're an apprentice, learning a trade under a stern master. Apprenticeships are their own kind of bargain. You work for years, mostly unpaid, enduring beatings, scoldings, and endless errands in exchange for the hope of one day becoming a master yourself. If you're a servant, your wages are often paid in food and shelter, with a few battered coins at year's end. If you're lucky, the line between servant and slave can blur, especially if you owe debts or have nowhere else to go. The market is the hub of working life. Here, the village wakes up and rubs elbows, everyone hawking their wares, from fish so fresh they still twitch to cabbages so old they could walk off on their own. There's always a bit of theatre, the fishmonger's boast, the weaver's quiet pride, the baker's sly wink as he slips you a loaf that's not quite up to snuff. If you have a little extra, you might barter for something new: a length of ribbon, a sweet bun, a wooden spoon. Historians still argue whether medieval labourers had more free time than modern workers. Some point to festivals and holy days. So many, it seems, that half the year is spent feasting, fasting, or celebrating. Others insist the reality was much harsher. Those holidays were days when you didn't get paid, but still had to show up just in case the master needed an extra pair of hands. The truth probably lies somewhere in the middle. There are days of rest, yes, but more often than not they come with a price: extra chores, unpaid labour, or the nagging worry that you'll fall behind. Wages are always precarious. The cost of bread might rise overnight, wiping out your savings. The Lord could decide to raise the rent. The market might flood with cheap goods from a rival town, or a bout of sickness could empty your purse in a matter of days. You learn to live on hope, to celebrate the rare windfall, to find solace in small victories: a well-mended tool, a kind word from your master, a day when the rain holds off just long enough to finish the harvest. Fringe stories abound. There's always someone who claims to have struck it rich, finding a lost purse, winning the favor of a wealthy merchant, or stumbling on a bit of silver buried in the field. Most of these tales are pure fantasy, but they keep you dreaming on the coldest nights. There are also stories of the unlucky workers crushed in the quarry, children lost in the loom, families ruined by a single bad bargain. There's risk in everything you do. The fields are full of hazards: sharp tools, angry livestock, sudden storms that flatten your hard work in an afternoon. In town, the forge can burn you, the dye pots poison you, the spinning wheel tangle your hair and fingers. Some days you wonder if it's worth it. Other days, you marvel at how much you can endure. You're always looking for ways to save a penny here, a half loaf there. Maybe you pick wild herbs to flavor your gruel, or gather nuts and berries to stretch the larder. If you have a small garden, you treat it like gold, coaxing every sprout from the reluctant earth. Even then, you know a single hailstorm could wipe out your hard work. Saving is an act of stubborn hope. Family is both a burden and a blessing. Every extra mouth means more work, but also more hands to help. Children learn early, watching, copying, taking on small tasks before they can even speak in full sentences. There's pride in watching your oldest carry a bucket, in seeing your daughter spin her first thread, in teaching your son to sharpen a blade. You share your victories and your failures, your laughter and your exhaustion. There are moments of genuine joy, the first fruits of harvest, the rare day when everyone comes home early, the laughter that erupts when someone accidentally tips a wheelbarrow or startles a goose into flight. Work is hard, but it is also life shared, endured, and sometimes even enjoyed. You might envy the rich, but you know their world is full of its own anxieties. Managing estates, navigating politics, fearing rebellion. Sometimes you hear stories of lords who lost everything in a bad war or a bad harvest, ending up poorer than the peasants they once commanded. You take comfort in the idea that for all its hardship, your life is your own, or as much your own as anyone's can be in a world where survival hangs by a thread. Saving a coin is nearly impossible, but every so often, you manage it. Maybe you hide it in the thatch, bury it under a stone, or tuck it in the toe of your shoe. It feels heavier than it should, a symbol of hope, a promise that one day things might be better. There's always the fear it will be found by a thief, a rat, or a curious child, but for now, it's yours. And then, of course, there are the taxes, the tolls at the bridge, the tithe to the church, the rent to the Lord, the odd fee for using the village oven or grinding your grain at the mill. Every step forward seems to come with a hand outstretched, demanding its share. But you keep going, because work, wages, and that dream of a penny saved, however impossible, are all that stand between you and the hunger that always lurks just around the corner. So you rise with the sun, work till you drop, and if you're lucky, count your blessings and your coins before crawling back into bed. It's not an easy life, but it's yours. And in the medieval world, that's about as good as it gets. The sun is barely up when you're reminded by the clang of church bells, the thud of approaching boots, or the sharp knock on your flimsy door that it's time to pay your dues. You might have survived another night under your own roof, but in the medieval world, the cost of simply existing doesn't stop with work and food. Taxes, tithes, tolls, rents, fines. There's an endless line of hands reaching out for their share, and the penalty for coming up short can be steep indeed. First, there's the rent. If you're a peasant or tenant farmer, you don't own your land. Almost nobody does except the lords and sometimes the church. Every inch you plough, every bean you plant, technically belongs to someone else. Then there's the tithe, a tenth of everything you grow or earn, paid straight to the church. The priest might live no better than you do, but he's the local face of a system that stretches all the way to Rome. You watch your neighbors carry sacks of grain to the church's barn, or try to hide a few eggs in a basket of rushes, hoping the tithe collector won't notice. The king's taxes are another story. Some are predictable: a head tax, a hearth tax, a levy for the king's wars. Others spring up overnight: a gift for the royal wedding, a new toll for crossing a bridge or using the market square, a fee for grinding your grain at the Lord's mill. Each new tax is announced with a flourish, explained away as a necessary measure to protect the realm or support the church or keep the roads safe from bandits. But the effect is always the same. Your purse grows lighter, your worry heavier. In towns, taxes are collected with almost bureaucratic efficiency. Clerks with ledgers, bailiffs with staffs always eager to note a missed payment or overdue toll. In the countryside, collection can be more violent. A squad of men-at-arms turning out whole families, confiscating a pig or a cartload of hay as payment in kind. Some taxes make you shake your head in disbelief. There's the infamous window tax. Pay more for every window your house has, so the poor block theirs up to save a coin living in gloom. Or the salt tax, raising the price of one of the few preservatives that stands between your family and starvation. There are stories of enterprising villagers smuggling salt in their boots, or building secret windows at the back of the house, plastered over when the taxman visits. Every new levy sparks a round of complaints and clever workarounds. If you live near a town or along a major road, tolls are part of daily life. The bridgekeeper, the gate warden, even the local miller, all have the right to demand a coin or a share of your goods for using their property. If you refuse, you might find yourself barred from the market or worse, hauled before the manorial court. where justice is swift and rarely in your favor. The church, meanwhile, is relentless. Beyond tithes, there are fees for every major event in your life: a coin to baptize your child, another to marry, another still to bury your dead. If you want to be sure your loved ones' souls are safe, you pay for extra prayers, candles, or masses. Some families go into debt for years to pay off a single funeral. There's a joke among peasants: you're born owing the church and die paying the priest. You try to laugh, but it stings. When the bailiffs or collectors come calling, you're expected to drop everything and show what you owe. Sometimes this means hauling out your only pig or opening your last jar of honey. Sometimes it means emptying the stash of coins you've saved for months, hoping nobody notices the 2 coppers you managed to hide under a loose floorboard. If you're clever or well-liked, you might get a day's grace. If not, you pay or you lose. There's no negotiating with a man holding the king's writ. There are penalties for failing to pay: fines, confiscation, even imprisonment in the local stocks or gaol. The stocks are a special humiliation. Your neighbours jeering as you sit exposed, rain or shine, your debts on public display. For bigger debts, the threat is worse: eviction, loss of land, sometimes being sent to work on a lord's distant estate as an indentured labourer until your dues are paid. Some villagers joke that paying taxes is like paying for the privilege of being poor. If you're a craftsman or a merchant, the picture changes, but only a little. You pay fees to join the guild, dues to keep your stall in the market, and a share of your profits to the town's rulers. Sometimes the guild helps if you fall on hard times: a loaf of bread, a few coins, a prayer for your soul. But there are always strings attached. Membership isn't free, and the rules can change with little warning. It's not only money the authorities want, it's your time and labour. Every year, the lord or the town council might demand a day or a week of corvée labour, working on the roads, cleaning the ditches, building fortifications, or repairing the mill. Refuse and you'll pay a fine, or worse. These tasks are unpaid, exhausting, and disrupt your own work, but there's no arguing with the system. One fringe story making the rounds is that a clever peasant once paid his tithe in turnips, painted gold, tricking the church for a whole season. Whether it's true or not, you laugh at the idea and secretly wish you'd thought of it first. Another tale tells of a woman who disguised her prized cow as a goat to dodge the livestock tax. The priest eventually caught on, but the whole village cheered her audacity. Historians still debate whether the medieval tax burden was heavier than today's. Some point to the sheer variety and unpredictability of taxes. Others argue that because so many payments were in kind: crops, labour, livestock, peasants had ways to resist or avoid them. What's clear is that taxes shaped every aspect of daily life, dictating what you grew, what you sold, what you dared to own. There's always anxiety on collection day. Will the collector accept eggs instead of silver? Will the new headman demand double what the old one did? Will you be punished for coming up short, or will you scrape by once again with your dignity and your possessions mostly intact? The rituals never change. The worried counting, the frantic bargaining, the sigh of relief when the officials move on to the next house. And yet somehow life goes on. You find ways to cope, pooling resources with neighbours, hiding your best goods when the taxman visits, organising secret loan clubs where families lend each other grain or coins to get through lean years. There's a deep, weary camaraderie in the shared struggle, the sense that even when the world feels stacked against you, you're not alone in the fight. On rare days, something good comes from all the collecting. The church repairs the roof, the Lord funds a new bridge, the market square is swept clean. For a moment you glimpse the promise that taxes are meant to fulfill, but it's fleeting. Soon enough there's a new fee, a new collection, a new worry gnawing at your sleep. There's humour, too, in the absurdity of it all. Like the time the collector tripped over a goose and spent the day covered in feathers, or when the priest's horse ran off with the tithe cart, scattering coins across the village green. You laugh, not because it's truly funny, but because laughter is sometimes the only protest you have left. So you pay what you must, grumble with your neighbours, and count yourself lucky if you manage to keep a little back for your own needs. The cost of living in medieval times isn't just about what you can earn. It's about what you're allowed to keep after the world has taken its share. And as the bells ring out and the collectors vanish down the lane, you breathe easier for a while, knowing that you've survived another round. But you also know that tomorrow, or next week, or next month, they'll be back. The hands that take never seem to tire. You hear the rumble in your stomach before you even open your eyes. Hunger is a constant companion here, as familiar as your own shadow. Every day the search for food is the drumbeat behind everything you do, and the cost of eating, of simply staving off that ache for one more day, rules your thoughts, your time, and often your very sense of hope. Breakfast, if you get it, is likely a thin affair. Yesterday's coarse bread, maybe dipped in watered ale to soften the crust. Sometimes it's nothing at all, so you wait, half distracted by hunger, until the main meal of the day. For most in the medieval world, that meal comes at midday, when the sun is high, and your chores have built an appetite so sharp it feels like a punishment. Bread is the foundation of nearly every meal, but bread itself isn't always easy to come by. Wheat is expensive, so expensive that only the wealthy eat white bread made from fine flour. You make do with rye or barley, sometimes oats, sometimes a flour so mixed with beans or peas or even ground up tree bark that it tastes more like desperation than dinner. On bad years when the harvest fails, the bread is rough, dark, and can be so dense it's almost impossible to chew. There's a joke around the village that a good loaf can knock out a rat or a neighbour, if you're not careful with your aim. And it's not just jokes. Eating the wrong bread can make you sick. Rye, when spoiled, can harbour a toxic fungus called ergot. You've seen what happens when people eat it. Fits, hallucinations, even death. Historians still argue whether outbreaks of dancing mania and strange illnesses in medieval towns were really just the work of this sinister bread mould. Either way, you eye your loaf with suspicion, praying you're safe this time. Meat is a luxury. If you're a peasant, most days you don't eat it at all. Chickens and pigs are valuable alive for eggs and for breeding. Cows are kept for milk, not for slaughter. Maybe on Sundays or feast days you get a piece of bacon, a scrap of salted pork, or the odd fish pulled from the river. If you're very lucky, a neighbour shares some fresh game brought back from an illegal poaching trip in the Lord's force. The risk is high. Poaching is a crime that can earn you brutal punishment, but the promise of meat is sometimes worth it. On holidays you might taste something special, a roast goose, a pie filled with minced meat, or a stew rich with bones and scraps. These are days you remember, when the house fills with the smell of roasting fat, and for a little while, everyone laughs and eats with abandon. You scrape your plate, saving even the smallest bones to be boiled again for soup. Most days your diet is simpler. Cabbages, leeks, turnips, whatever will grow in the patch of earth behind your house. In summer, the table overflows with beans, peas and onions. In winter, you gnaw on dried peas and whatever root vegetables you manage to store away. You get creative, making porridge from oats, thickening stews with stale bread, stretching a pot of beans with handfuls of wild greens picked from the roadside. Cheese and butter, when you have them, are treats. If your cow is generous, you churn what milk you can spare, trading a wedge here and there for salt or honey, or a fresh loaf from the baker. Cheese keeps longer than milk, so you save it for lean times, often finding by the time you eat it that it's so hard you need a knife and strong teeth just to break off a bite. Eggs are another small blessing. Hens lay more in spring and summer, and you carefully collect every one, eating them quickly before they spoil. Sometimes you trade eggs for things you need, but most often you eat them for energy before a long day in the fields. The richest families eat eggs daily, sometimes with herbs or even a bit of fresh butter. For you, it's a cause for celebration. Every meal is a balancing act. You try to stretch what little you have to feed the family. A pot of pottage stew made from whatever's on hand, bubbling on the hearth all day, each new ingredient added as it becomes available. There are always jokes about what went into the pot, and whether it's the same stew from last week with a new name. Sometimes you think it might actually be true. In the towns, food choices are broader. Markets sell dried fish, imported spices at shocking prices, and barrels of pickled vegetables. But unless you have a few coins to spare, the variety means little. You watch as merchants haggle, as townsfolk walk away with fresh bread or honey cakes, and you imagine the taste sweet, soft, nothing like what's in your larder. The spectre of famine is never far away. Everyone has stories times when the rains failed, when locusts devoured the fields, when disease swept through the herds. You remember the stories your grandmother told about the year of no bread, when families boiled grass and bark, when people traded clothing and heirlooms for a single sack of barley. There are lean years when even the rats seem to starve, and you count every mouthful, scraping the last crumbs from the bottom of the barrel. Charity sometimes helps. On holy days, the church gives out bread to the poor, or a bit of fish during Lent. Wealthy families might sponsor a meal for the needy, a gesture that feeds both body and reputation. But there are never enough handouts to go around, and you learn not to rely on charity if you can help it. The cost of food is not just measured in coins. You pay in labor, hours spent planting, weeding, harvesting, and preserving. You pay in risk too, venturing out to gather wild berries, mushrooms, or herbs, knowing that a single mistake could mean poisoning instead of dinner. There are old stories of villages where everyone fell sick after eating spoiled grain, or after a feast of wild mushrooms picked by someone who swore they knew the safe ones. You laugh at the little disasters, the time your mother mistook salt for sugar and ruined the pottage, or when a fox snatched the only chicken you had, leaving nothing but feathers and a trail of paw prints. Some say the foxes have a better diet than half the villagers. Open debate still circles around how much better or worse off the poor really were compared to the past or to distant lands. Some historians argue that medieval peasants had more reliable access to basic food than their ancient ancestors. Others say climate change, population booms, and endless war made food insecurity worse. The truth probably shifts with the season, the weather, and a bit of luck. Feasts are both rare and unforgettable. On festival days, the village comes together, pooling resources to roast an ox, bake pies, or share fresh fruit. There's music, laughter, and for a brief moment, everyone eats their fill. These days live on in memory, bright spots in a calendar, otherwise ruled by hunger. You can recall the taste of honey cakes from last midsummer, the scent of roasting meat from the harvest festival, the sweetness of an apple split between friends. But the famine years haunt you too. You remember sharing the last crust of bread, watching your neighbors grow thin, hearing the stories of families lost to hunger. Some families leave the village, searching for work, for food, for hope. Others hunker down, rationing every bite, praying the next harvest will be kinder. There are ways to cheat hunger, even if just for a moment. Swapping food with neighbors, trading a day's labor for a bowl of stew, picking wild greens when the fields are bare. You learn to eat slowly, to savor each mouthful, to pretend that the pottage is richer than it is. There are always jokes about whose pottage is the best in the county, even when everyone knows it's the same watery brew. Some families manage a little garden, growing herbs, onions, maybe a row of beans or carrots. These plots are fiercely protected, weeded, and watered with care. There's pride in harvesting your own food, in eating something fresh instead of dried or pickled. You pass down seeds and stories, hoping next year's garden will be even better. And sometimes you simply go without. You drink extra water, chew on tough bread, tell stories to distract yourself from the ache. You count the days until the next festival, the next market, the next chance at something special. You never let food go to waste. Stale bread is toasted over the fire, bones boiled for soup, vegetable peelings fed to the pigs or chickens. Even the crumbs are swept up, fed to birds, or mixed into pottage. Waste is a luxury you cannot afford. Humor helps. You laugh about the mystery meat in the pottage, about the odd shapes of the turnips, about the time someone found a frog in the stew pot. You tease the neighbor with the worst onions, the baker whose bread could serve as a doorstop, the friend who claims to know the secret to catching trout, but never does. Yet beneath the jokes is a stubborn pride, the sense that, even when the world conspires against you, you will find a way to survive. You keep going, keep eating, keep sharing what you have. Because in the medieval world, hunger is never far away, but neither is hope. You wake to a familiar tickle in your throat, and you know before your feet hit the chilly floor, today will be a hard one. Getting sick in medieval times isn't a minor inconvenience. It's a threat to your entire family's well-being. Staying healthy is never a given. It's a battle you fight with every resource at hand. And the price you pay for illness can be far steeper than any other hardship. A cough, a fever, a festering wound. These are not problems you can simply push through and expect to bounce back. Most people in your world expect to fall ill every winter, and many do not survive past their 30s. The cause could be anything: a bad well, spoiled food, lice, or the damp that never leaves your clothes. Sometimes there's no cause at all, just the roll of a cosmic dice that leaves you shivering under thin blankets, praying for relief. Medicine, as you know it, is a patchwork of tradition, superstition, and the rare touch of genuine knowledge. The local healer, sometimes a wise woman, sometimes a barber, sometimes just the oldest person in the village, makes potions from herbs and barks, poultices from moss, and brews so bitter they seem designed to scare away the sickness by sheer taste alone. If you're lucky, the remedies help. If not, you simply hope for time and the strength to survive. There are doctors, of course, real physicians trained in distant cities, wearing long robes and carrying heavy books, but you probably will never meet one. Their services cost more than your family earns in a month, sometimes even a year. A visit from a physician is reserved for the lord, the local priest, or the wealthiest merchant in town. Even then, success is hardly guaranteed. Bloodletting, leeches, strange mixtures of honey and vinegar, or balancing the humours, these are their tools, and sometimes they seem more dangerous than the illness itself. Most people stick with the remedies they know: yarrow for fevers, garlic for coughs, elderberry for aches. You might tie a bit of red cloth around your neck to ward off evil spirits, or sleep with a carved charm under your pillow. If you can't work, you rely on your family and neighbours to keep you fed. But every extra day you're sick is another day of missed wages, another loaf of bread you can't afford. The cost of illness is measured in both coins and opportunity, a reminder that even a simple cold can tip your family toward ruin. You remember the time your brother cut his hand in the field. The wound swelled and turned red, spreading heat and pain up his arm. The healer brought a poultice of ground plantain and honey, bound the wound tight, and whispered a prayer over it. He survived, but his hand never worked quite the same again. There are stories of others not so lucky: farmers lost to tetanus from a rusty plough, children gone after a simple fever. Cleanliness is a struggle. You wash when you can, but water is precious and soap is expensive. Lice and fleas are as constant as hunger, and every scratch could be the start of an infection. You keep your hair short, your nails clipped, and your clothes as clean as possible, but it's a losing battle. There's a village joke: if you can't see the lice, you're not looking hard enough. Sometimes you laugh, sometimes you just itch and endure. There are more serious threats too, plagues that sweep through the land with little warning. The stories of Black Death haunt every generation, even if the last outbreak was years ago. You remember your grandmother describing how the church bells rang all day and the air filled with the sweet, rotting scent of so many bodies buried hurriedly outside the town. When the plague comes, it takes the rich and poor alike, but the poor suffer most. You shut your windows, burn pungent herbs, and pray the illness passes over your house. Open debate still circles around what actually worked in medieval medicine. Some scholars argue that certain herbal remedies genuinely helped, offering relief from fevers or infection. Others point out the dangers of mercury-laden potions, bloodletting, and treatments based more on myth than science. What's clear is that survival often depended as much on luck, genetics, and stubbornness as on any remedy. Historians still argue whether midwives and wise women were actually more successful than the university-trained doctors. Either way, most people trusted those who lived among them, not those who wore scholarly robes. When times are good and your family is healthy, you try not to think about what might happen if someone falls ill. But the worry never leaves. A neighbor's cough can sweep through the village in a week. An outbreak of ARG, a word for just about any mysterious fever, can empty the fields and fill the graveyard. There's comfort in routine, morning herbs, a garlic clove hung above the door, a mug of hot water with honey for the first sign of chill. Fringe stories fill the evenings, tales of miraculous healings and mysterious curses. The healer's black cat, rumored to cure warts with a glance. The boy who survived a snake bite by drinking 9 spoonfuls of well water mixed with powdered stone. The old woman who never fell ill because she wore nettles in her boots all winter. Some say these are just stories. Others swear by them, willing to try anything if it means one less day in bed. You can't afford to fall sick for long. Every day away from the fields, the forge, or the shop is a day lost. If you're a mother, the risk is doubled. Pregnancy and childbirth are as dangerous as war, and many women do not survive them. Midwives work by touch, by instinct, by old secrets passed down from mother to daughter. Sometimes their wisdom saves a life. Sometimes the best you can do is pray. There's laughter, too, around the sickbed. Jokes about doctors who prescribe fasting for a broken leg, or who insist a headache means you've angered the stars. You remember the time your cousin pretended to be ill just to avoid the harvest, and the look on his face when the healer prescribed a week of boiled onions. There's always a bit of light, even in the darkness. If you're wealthy, you have more options, but not always better ones. The Lord's physician might carry a case of expensive tools, but sometimes he's more interested in impressing guests than curing illness. You've heard of nobles dying from overzealous treatments, too much bleeding, too many potions, not enough rest. Sometimes the simplest remedies, clean water, fresh air, quiet, are the best medicine. Even if nobody wants to admit it, you rely on the community because you have to. Neighbors bring broth, tend the animals, gather herbs when you're too weak to stand. In return, you do the same when their turn comes. Illness is a burden everyone shares, a reminder that no one survives alone. There are good days, too, when you wake feeling strong. When the sun is warm and the coughs are gone, you savor those days, knowing they are borrowed, not promise. You celebrate small victories. The fever that breaks in the night, the wound that heals clean, the child who outgrows their sickly years. Some nights you whisper thanks for every day you make it through. You remember those who didn't, whose shoes you now wear, or whose place at the table sits empty. You tell stories to keep their memories alive, to remind yourself that health is never guaranteed. You hope for better, for your children if not for yourself. You teach them what little you know, how to spot a safe berry, how to make a poultice, how to wash a wound. You save a few pennies, just in case, but you know that all the coins in the world can't guarantee a cure. So you live carefully. You eat what's fresh, drink what's clean, avoid those who cough or limp. You hang charms, burn herbs, say prayers, because sometimes a little hope is the best medicine you have. Staying healthy in the medieval world is a balancing act, part luck, part labor, part old wives' tales and stubborn belief. The cost of illness isn't just paid in coins, but in lost days, lost strength, lost dream. But still you endure, waking each morning, ready to fight again for one more day, one more season, one more chance at a better year. You can smell it before you see it, the faint tang of smoke, the sharpness of sweat, and something indefinable you've come to think of as simply medieval living. Cleanliness is not a luxury here, it's a daily challenge, one where the cost can be measured in time, effort, and sometimes even ridicule. To live in this world is to accept a certain level of grime, and to know that getting truly clean body, clothes, even your soul, is a rare and precious thing. Your morning routine is practical, if not exactly refreshing. You splash your face with cold water from a bucket. If you're lucky, someone boiled a little yesterday and left it cooling in a crock. But for most, bathing means a quick wipe with a damp cloth, and maybe a handful of cold water to rouse your senses. Soap, if you have it, is harsh and rare, a greyish lump made from leftover animal fat and lye, smelling faintly of smoke and herbs. It strips away the worst of the dirt, but it can leave your skin red and dry. Clothes don't get washed often. Water is too precious to waste, and washing a tunic or shift means hauling buckets from the well, heating it over the fire, and scrubbing every inch by hand. Most days, you simply shake out the dust and hope for the best. If you live near a river, laundry day is a community event. The women and girls gather on the banks, kneeling in the mud and beating clothes against flat stones. It's a time for gossip and jokes about whose shirt is dirtiest, who lost a sock in the current, whose underthings are patched in the most embarrassing places. Sometimes the Fullers get involved. They are the professionals of cloth cleaning, and their methods are legendary and sometimes notorious. To make woolen garments soft and clean, they soak them in tubs of stale urine collected by the bucketful from every household in town, and then trample or beat the cloth for hours. The process leaves the wool thick and weatherproof, but the smell can linger for days. There's a running joke that you can always tell a Fuller by his hands, red and raw, and his nose completely desensitized. Bathhouses are another matter, and a sign of rare prosperity. In towns and cities, there are public baths, places of steam, warmth, and for many, a little harmless mischief. You pay a small fee for entry, leave your clothes with an attendant, and settle into the hot water. For most villagers, though, bathing is a seasonal affair. There's a flurry of cleaning before big feasts, like Easter or Christmas, and maybe a splash in the river on hot days. Children are more likely to be dunked than scrubbed, and elders sometimes prefer a quick rinse to the effort of a real wash. Better to be healthy than clean, the old saying goes, and you repeat it often, especially in winter. Historians still argue whether medieval people cared about cleanliness as much as we do today. Some records show lords and ladies bathing weekly with perfumed water and linen towels. Others insist that most people went months without a proper wash, relying on a strong scent or a fresh change of shirt to mask the worst. The truth is probably somewhere in between, clean when you can, dirty when you must, always conscious of the judgment of neighbors and the jokes of friends. Smells are part of life. Everyone has a scent, a mix of earth, smoke, sweat, and whatever they've last eaten. If someone shows up to church freshly scrubbed, heads turn and whispers fly. Is there a wedding? A new job? Or maybe just an outbreak of lice in the household? Children tease each other about dirty ears or muddy knees. Grown-ups trade stories about the worst-smelling person they've ever met. There are always strong contenders. Tooth care is primitive but earnest. You chew on twigs to clean your teeth, sometimes rubbing in salt or herbs if you can spare them. The wealthy have toothpicks made of silver or bone, a little status symbol they show off after meals. You avoid sweet foods, not because you're worried about cavities, but because you can't afford honey or dried fruit very often anyway. If a tooth rots, it's pulled quick, brutal, and almost always by someone with more enthusiasm than experience. There's a fringe belief that dirt keeps you healthy, that it toughens the body and wards off illness. Some mothers boast that their children never get sick because they're always a little muddy. Others say a regular dip in the river is all the medicine you need. The debate goes on around the fire, everyone offering a story of the cleanest or dirtiest person they ever knew, or the time someone got sick right after their annual bath. Bugs are everywhere. Lice, fleas, bed bugs, tiny enemies that invade your hair, your bedding, your clothes. You spend hours picking them out, crushing them between your fingernails, boiling your sheets when you can. There's a certain pride in catching the first louse of spring. It's as fat as the mayor's purse, someone jokes, and a quiet horror when you realize they never really go away. Cats and dogs help keep the rats down, but you can't rid your house of pests altogether. Scent is part of social currency. The rich mask their odors with perfumes and herbal sachets, hanging sprigs of lavender in their clothes, or burning incense in their halls. The poor improvise, chewing mint, rubbing wild thyme on their wrists, or burning juniper branches to freshen the air. On feast days, the church is filled with the scent of flowers and herbs, an effort to make everyone forget the less pleasant odors of daily life. You joke about the medieval cologne, a combination of sweat, wood smoke, and whatever you last stepped in. Friends tease the apprentice who fell into the tannery pit, or the baker who smells like yeast. Even on his day off, the laughter is genuine and necessary because sometimes humor is the only defense against a world that never seems entirely clean. The struggle for cleanliness shapes other parts of life too. You eat with your hands. Knives and spoons are precious, and forks are rare. So washing before meals is more than just good manners. You wipe your hands on your clothes on straw mats, or if you're lucky, on a shared cloth at the table. Afterward, everyone checks their fingers for stray bits of grease or bread, licking them clean if no one is looking. Cooking and cleaning blend together. You sweep the hearth, scrub the pot, and toss the scraps to the animals. The pigs eat almost anything, and the chickens do their part too. Keeping the house clean is mostly about managing waste, keeping it outside, out of sight, and as far from the well as possible. The rules are simple. Don't throw slops near the front door, don't leave meat to rot, and always sweep the floor before guests arrive. There's a running debate about the value of soap. Some say it's a miracle, others say it's a waste of good fat. You try making your own once, but the result is so caustic you use it to clean pots, not people. The wealthy buy imported soap from distant lands, scented with roses or spices, a status symbol almost as prized as a fine cloak or a silver spoon. Children are the dirtiest of all, but also the least bothered. They splash in puddles, roll in the dust, pick berries with sticky fingers, and return home looking like they've wrestled with the pigs. You scold, scrub, and threaten, but you know that a little dirt never hurt anyone, at least. That's what you tell yourself when the laundry pile grows too high. The cycle of cleaning and dirtying is endless. You wash the clothes, they're muddy by sundown. You sweep the floor, someone tracks in dust. You scrub your face, and by midday, the sweat is back. But there's a kind of satisfaction in it, a sense of order in a world full of chaos. Sometimes you envy the stories of distant lands, places where people bathe daily, where scented oils are cheap, where rivers run clear and baths are as common as bread. But most days, you accept your world as it is. You take pride in small victories, a clean shirt, a washed face, a sweet-smelling herb tucked in your belt. You know that for all the effort, true cleanliness is as fleeting as a sunny day, but you keep trying because it's part of what makes you feel human, part of what separates your life from the animals in the yard, the mud in the street, the darkness that presses in at night. So you laugh about the dirt, make jokes about your own smell, and cherish the rare days when you can sink into a bath or wash your hair with more than just a splash of water. In the medieval world, staying clean isn't just about hygiene, it's about hope, humor, and the stubborn refusal to let the world's grime steal your dignity. You hear the church bell echoing down the lane, and it stirs something in your chest, a feeling equal parts excitement and dread. Today, you're reminded, is a wedding day in the village, but in the medieval world, falling in love and tying the knot is about far more than fluttering hearts or chance encounters by the well. Marriage comes with a cost, sometimes a ruinous one, and navigating it means weighing dreams against hard, practical reality. For most families, the first talk of marriage is less about romance than economics. Who can afford to wed? Who brings what to the table? A dowry, money, land, livestock, even clothing or kitchen pots follows every eligible bride like a second shadow. And it's not just the bride who pays. Grooms must bring something too, maybe land or tools, or if he's from a family of means, a promise of security, a place to live, and a way to feed the new family. Negotiations between families are long and careful. Both sides eye each other's holdings. The number of animals in the pen, the size of the house, the quality of the soil. Sometimes marriages are arranged before the bride and groom are even old enough to walk. Sometimes deals are struck at the last minute, when an unexpected inheritance or a sudden death shifts the balance of power. Then there are the marriage portions. You hear about girls whose parents promise a whole cow, a chest of linen, or even a bit of land to sweeten the bargain. In wealthier families, it might be gold coins, silver spoons, or embroidered gowns. Sometimes the church steps in, collecting marriage alms to help poorer girls marry, a gesture meant to boost both morality and the local population. The church is deeply involved in every union. Before you can marry, you need permission. Banns read out in church for 3 weeks to make sure there are no secret spouses or hidden impediments. If you're caught marrying without permission, eloping in the woods, or sneaking off to the next village, you risk fines, public shaming, or at worst having your marriage declared invalid. Everyone jokes about the runaway bride, but everyone also remembers the stories of girls left with nothing when their secret marriages were rejected. The actual wedding is both a public spectacle and a family negotiation. You might walk together to the church, dressed in your best, though for most best means a freshly washed tunic, a flower crown, and perhaps borrowed shoes. The priest blesses the union, the families exchange gifts, and then the feasting begins. For a few glorious hours, everyone forgets about the debts and the bargains, sharing bread, ale, and laughter until the candles burn low. But marriage doesn't just cost coins. There are the endless rituals, the gifts to the priest, the payment for the church bells, the special candles for the altar. Even getting permission to wed can require a fee, especially if you want to skip the wait or marry out of season. If one of you is a widow or widower, there may be further complications, payments to the former spouse's family, or disputes over children and inheritance. Sometimes, marriage is about survival as much as love. A widow with children needs a new husband to keep the farm running. An orphaned girl needs a protector, someone to keep the landlord's hand at bay. There are stories of marriages struck on market day as a solution to hunger or homelessness rather than romance. Open debate still circles among historians about how much agency medieval women really had in marriage. Some say a clever girl could steer her own fate with a well-timed word or a bit of mischief. Others argue most girls simply accepted the match their family arranged, hoping for kindness and luck. Either way, the process is rarely simple and never cheap. If you're lucky, the new household gets a head start. Friends and neighbors pitch in with gifts. A sack of grain, a pair of geese, a few coins tucked into a shoe. There's a custom in some villages of bedding the couple, escorting them to the marriage bed with raucous singing and not a little teasing. It's embarrassing, but it means you're starting life together with the blessing of the whole community. But not all marriages go smoothly. There are whispered stories about bargains gone wrong, a dowry that never materialized, a bride who turned out not to be a virgin, a groom who disappears with the family's savings. The church is supposed to arbitrate such disputes, but often the loser is whoever has the least power. There's humor in the chaos, like the time the local priest forgot the marriage vows and had to make them up on the spot, or when the wedding feast turned into a shouting match over who owed whom a chicken. People still talk about the couple who swapped roles for the day, the bride arriving in breeches and the groom in her veil, a memory that makes everyone laugh, but also reminds them how rigid the rules usually are. Sometimes, love does win out. There are tales of couples who met by accident, herding sheep, drawing water at the well, and managed to convince their families that destiny was at work. These stories are retold every spring, a bit brighter with each telling, but most marriages are a blend of affection and arrangement, hopes and haggling. Once married, the costs don't stop. Setting up a new home means acquiring tools, animals, maybe even paying the landlord a harriet, a fee for inheriting a house or piece of land. There are new clothes to sew, seeds to buy, debts to settle. The first year is often the hardest, learning to live together, managing two families' expectations, balancing work, children, and endless repairs. If you're from a poor family, sometimes you delay marriage, as long as you can. Girls enter service in wealthier homes to save up a small dowry. Boys hire themselves out for day labor, or travel to towns in search of better prospects. There's always hope that a little extra time will tip the balance. A lucky break, a good harvest, a neighbor's kindness. In towns and cities, marriage comes with its own price tags. Guilds may charge a fee for marrying outside your trade, and apprentices sometimes need special permission to wed before earning their master's license. Some neighborhoods host group weddings, a dozen couples at once, all trying to save on costs. It turns the affair into a party, with dancing in the streets and a competition for the finest cake or best wedding song. There are fringe customs too. In some places, the bride is kidnapped, with her full knowledge, of course, and rescued by the groom for a staged fee. In others, a fake dowry is presented, turnips painted gold, a rooster with a ribbon, just to keep the mood light and spirits high. These games remind everyone that beneath the seriousness, marriage is still a time for laughter and hope. And then there's the matter of children. The expectation is clear: start a family, carry on the name, add more hands to the farm. But that too is a cost. A topic for another day. For now, you settle into your new home, counting blessings and debts, and hoping the future will be kinder than the past. Historians still argue whether love matches or arranged marriages led to more happiness in the end. What's clear is that, no matter how you arrive at the altar, marriage in the medieval world is a transaction of goods, of hopes, of hard-won bargains. The cost can be high, but for most, it's worth every coin, every chicken, every awkward moment at the feast. So you laugh at the chaos, dance at the wedding, and whisper your prayers that your own match will bring more joy than sorrow. In this world, love may not conquer all, but it can make the struggle a little sweeter, and the cost of living, if not easier, a little more bearable. Your days are shaped by the children around you, their laughter, their tears, their muddy footprints all over your precious hard-earned floor. In the medieval world, having children is both a hope and a hazard, a blessing that could tip a family into poverty as easily as prosperity. You remember your own childhood, days spent gathering firewood, fetching water, watching younger siblings, and when you were old enough, taking your first halting steps behind the plough or learning to spin wool by the hearth. Children here do not get the luxury of a long, playful youth. From the time they can walk, they are an extra pair of hands, a helper in the endless labor of survival. It's a strange kind of pride when your youngest learns to herd the geese or collect eggs without getting pecked. Childhood is brief, and its joys are often snatched between chores, but every small success feels like a family victory. Still, each child is another mouth to feed, another body to clothe, and another worry to add to your sleepless nights. You understand why some families pray for small harvests, fearing too many children will tip the balance into hunger. You have friends who lost siblings to fevers, accidents, or the simple slow fade of starvation during a hard winter. The church teaches that children are a blessing from God, and they are, but in this world, even blessings have a price. Most families hope for large broods, reasoning that not every child will survive, and those who do will be needed to work the land, tend the animals, or support aging parents when strength fades. If you're lucky, half your children will reach adulthood. Disease is relentless. Smallpox, measles, whooping cough, and countless unnamed fevers claim little ones before they can even learn to speak. When a baby survives its first year, you throw a small feast if you can manage it. It's both celebration and relief, a moment of light in the long shadow of uncertainty. Raising children costs more than food and clothes. You worry constantly about the future. Will there be enough land to divide among them? Will your daughters find decent husbands? Or will their lack of a dowry keep them at home? Will your sons learn a skill? Or will they be forced into day labor, scraping by in another man's field? Sometimes the village seems full of hungry children, all hoping for the same scarce apprenticeships or marriage matches. School is a rare luxury. Most children learn what they need from parents, older siblings, or neighbors. If you live near a monastery or a wealthy town, there might be a schoolhouse, one room, a stern teacher, and a few battered slates for writing. But tuition is high, and you can't spare a worker from the fields for long. Boys sometimes learn to read and count if their parents are ambitious, but girls are usually expected to master housework, spinning, and the mysteries of making a good loaf of bread from scratch. You hear stories, half envy, half awe, of children sent to live with relatives in the city, apprenticed to a tailor, a baker, or a merchant. The promise, in 7 years, they'll come home with a trade, a skill, and maybe a few coins of their own. The risk, homesickness, mistreatment, or a master who cheats them out of their promised reward. But for many, it's the only hope of moving up in the world. Historians still argue about just how hard medieval childhood really was. Some say children found plenty of time for play, running wild in the fields or fishing in the river between chores. Others insist that life was a grind from the start, with little room for laughter or rest. You know the truth is both. There are moments of freedom, a summer afternoon picking berries, a game of stickball in the lane, but always the work waits, and always the next meal depends on how well you all pull together. There are light moments too. You laugh when your youngest falls asleep in the cabbage patch, or when your oldest comes home covered in mud after a wrestling match with the neighbor's boys. Festivals are a time for mischief, chasing geese, sneaking sweets, staying up too late around the bonfire. You remember your own misadventures, and you tell stories to your children about the time you caught a fish as big as your arm, never mind the truth. But worries persist. Every new baby means another set of swaddling cloths, more shoes to patch, more food to stretch. Mothers work miracles turning scraps into clothes, reusing everything until even the patch is a patch. Some years when the crops fail, you make heart-wrenching decisions. Who gets the last piece of bread? Which child will go to bed hungry? How to hide your own hunger so the children eat first. There are fringe tales, too, of families sending unwanted children to the church or the local lord's estate, hoping for a better life, or at least a full belly. Some become pages, servants, or nuns. You know of a girl who was taken in by the nuns, and now writes letters home in a careful, practiced hand, her words carrying a whiff of a world your own children may never see. Others vanish into the endless churn of city life, their fates unknown. The church sometimes helps, handing out bread or soup to the poorest children, teaching basic prayers and songs. On special feast days, orphans are given shoes or new tunics, reminders that charity, while thin, does exist. You do your part too, sharing when you can, remembering the times your own family received kindness. You teach your children skills for survival, how to recognize a safe mushroom, how to mend a torn hem, how to carry water without spilling a drop. You hope they'll be clever enough to avoid the worst mistakes, wise enough to find their own way, and lucky enough to marry well or find a trade. You know deep down that the world is fickle. Good children can fall on hard times, and even the most wayward can find fortune. You joke with your neighbors about selling the children to the next merchant who passes through, but you would fight tooth and nail to keep them safe. Your dreams for them are simple: health, enough to eat, a warm bed, and a future less hard than your own. Open debate swirls around the value of education. Some parents believe reading is for priests and merchants, not farmers. Others save for years to send a child to school, convinced that even a little learning could change everything. You've heard of boys who became scribes, their careful letters bringing in more coin than a season's harvest. You worry about the future, always. When your children are old enough, you help arrange their marriages, seeking good matches with neighbors or distant cousins. Dowries are smaller for the poor, sometimes just a goose or a basket of eggs, but still a burden. For boys, the price of buying into a guild or starting a small shop can be staggering. Illness stalks your family. Every winter, you pray for mild weather, for the coughs and fevers to pass you by. When one child falls sick, you fear it will spread to the rest. There are stories of families wiped out by a single outbreak, or of babies buried before they ever spoke a word. When a child recovers, you thank every saint you know, light a candle in the church, and try not to think about the next time. You find humor in the chaos. The neighbor's boy who lost his pants climbing the apple tree, the daughter who painted her cheeks with berry juice before a festival, the endless parade of small disasters that somehow become family legends. Laughter is as necessary as bread. In the end, children are both your burden and your hope. They make the world worth fighting for, even when every day is a struggle. You measure your wealth not in coins, but in the noisy, messy, joyful chaos that fills your home. The real cost of living in medieval times, for most, it's the price of raising the next generation. One mouthful, one patched tunic, one stubborn hope at a time. The village is quiet at dawn, but you know how quickly things can turn. Living in the medieval world means knowing that one misstep, intentional or not, can bring punishment down hard, and the price for breaking the law isn't just a slap on the wrist. It can ripple through your family, your standing, and sometimes your very survival. Most days you try to keep your head down, but even the smallest mistake, stepping on the wrong field, owing a forgotten debt, getting caught with a forbidden rabbit, can change the course of your life. Rules here aren't just written in dusty books. They're woven into daily life. The Lord's word is law, and so is the church's. There are customs passed down so long that nobody remembers where they came from, only that they must be followed. Some are fair, but many are arbitrary, and often justice depends on who's watching and who you know. You hear the stories every week. Someone fined for grazing their goat on common land before sunrise, or for taking more firewood than was allowed from the forest. A neighbour caught brewing ale without the right stamp from the ale taster. Yes, that's a real job. Someone gets paid to drink your ale and declare it worthy. A boy found picking apples from the wrong orchard, and now owing a fine bigger than his father's monthly wage. If you're unlucky, your case ends up before the manor court. The bailiff, scribes, and jurors are mostly other villagers, but their loyalties are complicated. Sometimes a clever plea, a gift of cheese, or the right word in the right ear gets you off with a warning. Other times justice is swift and public. Fines, stocks, and pillories are the everyday penalties, and everyone gathers to watch when someone is punished. It's a warning, and if you're honest, a little bit of entertainment on a slow day. The stocks sit on the green wooden holes for your ankles and wrists, and a crowd quick to throw rotten vegetables or laugh as you squirm. You've seen the embarrassment etched on the faces of neighbours and friends, guilty of little more than failing to pay a fee, quarrelling too loudly, or failing to show up for church on Sunday. Public shame is half the punishment. For bigger crimes, there's flogging or a stint in the local jail. Cold, damp, and barely big enough to lie down in. You pray never to see it from the inside. Punishments are not just for adults. Children get the rod or a stint in the stocks too. You remember the time the baker's boy was caught pinching a sweet roll, and the whole village lined up to tease him. The joke's still going years later. There are stories of children branded as thieves, or sent to work on a distant farm to pay off a family debt. Sometimes the fines are laughable, 1 or 2 pennies for missing a toll, or using the wrong weights at market. But for the poor, a penny is never just a penny. Every fine is another meal skipped, another cloak not mended, another day you worry about what tomorrow will bring. If you can't pay, the court might take your tools, your livestock, even your only blanket. Sometimes whole families are ruined by the debt of a single member. Open debate still circles among historians about whether these punishments were meant to maintain order or just enrich those in power. Some say medieval justice was, for its time, shockingly community-minded juries drawn from your neighbours, punishments public, but often short-lived. Others argue that the endless web of tolls, fees, and fines was a system designed to keep the poor in their place. The truth, as usual, lies somewhere in between. Justice could be fair or it could be brutal, depending on the day and the mood of those in charge. The church has its own punishments. If you skip too many services, talk back to the priest, or get caught breaking a fast, you could be fined, forced to stand in church in a white sheet, or in rare cases, excommunicated, cut off from your neighbours and from hope of heaven. There are stories of couples forced to confess their quarrels in front of the congregation, of widows shamed for suspicious behaviour, of men who dared speak against the bishop and found themselves banned from the village oven or mill. Fringe tales of injustice travel fast. You've heard of a woman who spent a week in the stocks for gossiping about the Lord's daughter, or a man who was fined for wearing shoes too fine for his station. The sumptuary laws meant to keep the classes apart can be wielded like a cudgel against anyone who seems to rise too high. Sometimes the best way to avoid trouble is to blend in, dress plainly, speak softly, and pay every toll before you're asked. There's humour even here, like the story of the tanner who, fined for foul-smelling hides, dumped his next batch right by the manor gate as a silent protest. or the traveling fiddler who escaped punishment by serenading the judge with a new tune. Sometimes wit is your best weapon. If you can make the court laugh, your punishment might be less severe. Other times, the sharp tongue only makes things worse. If you're a stranger in town, you're even more vulnerable. The hue and cry can be raised by anyone. Shout that a thief is near and every able-bodied person must join the chase. If you're caught, it's your word against a mob, and the local lord may not care for your excuses. Foreigners are easy targets, fined for minor infractions, blamed for missing goods, or simply chased out of town. You learn quickly to keep your head down, pay every toll, and trust no one with your secrets. When the crime is serious murder, arson, or repeated theft, the punishments are harsher: branding, exile, even death. These are rare, but everyone knows the stories. The sight of a gallows or a thief's ear nailed to the post is meant to scare everyone straight. Sometimes it works, sometimes it just adds to the stories you tell around the fire at night. There's always risk in speaking out. If you complain about the Lord's taxes, the church's rules, or a neighbor's lies, you might find yourself facing a fine or worse. Yet gossip and complaint are part of village life. Jokes about the bailiff's nose, the scribe's bad handwriting, or the Lord's latest folly circle behind closed doors, a safety valve in a world where open protest is dangerous. Historians still argue whether medieval people feared punishment more than modern people do, or whether the closeness of community made the threat less severe. You know that, for all the risks, life goes on. The stocks are cleaned, the fines are paid, the gossip moves on to a new target. You remember the lessons and teach your children to watch their step, to mind their tongues, to help neighbors in trouble, because everyone ends up needing a friend at court someday. If you're especially clever or lucky, you might find ways to turn punishment into profit. Some families make extra coins selling food to those in the stocks or entertaining the crowd with stories and jokes. The miller's wife is famous for selling pies on punishment day, and the children bet on how long the local drunk will last before begging forgiveness. You try to live carefully, but you know that justice isn't always blind. The rich and powerful find ways to avoid the worst penalties, buying pardons or shifting blame onto their servants. For the poor, mercy is harder to find. Still, you cling to the hope that honesty, kindness, and a bit of luck will keep your family safe. In the end, the cost of breaking the rules in the medieval world is measured not just in coins or bruises, but in the stories that linger long after the stocks are empty. You laugh, you mourn, and you remember knowing that tomorrow you might be the one standing on the green, hoping for forgiveness and a quick end to your shame. Night falls fast in the medieval world. One moment, the fields are washed in gold and the market stalls echo with voices. The next, shadows swallow the lanes and everything changes. For most people, the arrival of darkness signals the end of the day's work and the start of a nightly battle with gloom and with the cost of keeping the dark at bay. The phrase "keeping the lights on" isn't just a modern struggle. It's a real and constant calculation, and for your ancestors it was a far more literal and expensive dilemma than it is today. You know the feel of dusk. The fire in the hearth is dying down, and you hurry to finish the last chores while you can still see a spilled pail, a missed stitch, a stubbed toe. These are the risks when the world blurs into shadow. You light a tallow candle, watching it sputter and hiss, and immediately feel a tiny stab of worry. Every hour of light is another penny spent, another favor owed, another chunk of precious fat gone forever. Candles are luxury goods. A simple tallow candle made from animal fat is hard to make, smoky, and often stinks of last winter's stew. Beeswax candles are better, burning brighter, longer, and almost sweet-smelling, but they're far too costly for most villagers. They are the pride of churches and the tables of the wealthy, where golden pools of light flicker across tapestries and silver cups. Most of the time you make do with what you can, scraping every bit of fat into a mold, dipping rushes in tallow, or twisting dry moss and resin into makeshift torches. Lighting up the night is not a habit taken lightly. You don't burn candles for fun. A single tallow candle, depending on size, might cost a day's wages for a laborer. You think carefully, is this the night for a celebration? A birth? A wake? If not, the candle stays unlit. For ordinary evenings, you save every scrap, working by the faint orange glow of the hearth or a rushlight, little more than a reed dipped in grease, burning fast and uneven, its smell filling the room and your eyes stinging from the smoke. If you live in a town, there might be a lamp or two flickering outside, near the church or town hall, usually fueled with expensive oil brought from distant lands, or made from pressed nuts or seeds. Oil lamps are rare and precious. Most people, even in town, simply go to bed when the sun does, leaving the streets to the moon, the foxes, and the occasional night watchman stumbling by with a lantern and a stick. There's always a sense of nervousness as the light fades. Every shadow becomes a threat, tripping over a bucket, stepping on a sleeping dog, or worse, the possibility of someone lurking outside. Doors are barred and windows shuttered tight, less for warmth than for safety. In towns, curfews are enforced with sharp words and sharper fines. Strangers are met with suspicion, and honest folk make sure to be home well before the last streaks of daylight vanish. Historians still argue how much time medieval people actually spent awake after sunset. Some claim families gathered around the hearth for hours, telling stories, mending clothes, or working by firelight. Others believe most folks simply surrendered to the dark, using the long nights for sleep and rest. In truth, it's probably both. Some nights you push through, working or celebrating late. Other nights the darkness is just too deep to fight. Every home develops its own tricks for getting by. You might arrange your chores to make the most of the afternoon sun, knitting, mending, or reading if you're lucky enough to own a book by the last light in the doorway. Some families use bedtime routines that would be familiar today: prayers, a warm drink, one last check that the embers are safe, and then everyone huddles close under the blankets, drifting off to the crackle of the fire. Candles are rationed, sometimes broken in half to make them last, or traded with neighbors for eggs, bread, or an extra hand at harvest. There's a village legend about the miser who lit his candle at both ends to save money, only to wind up with twice as much smoke and half as much light. Children are taught early to be careful around open flames. A knocked-over candle can spell disaster, a burnt hand at best, or at worst the loss of your home. Fires are both blessing and curse. The hearth is the heart of the house, providing light, warmth, and the means to cook every meal. But wood is precious, and keeping the fire going all night is a luxury. You bank the embers before bed, hoping they'll still be hot come morning, saving yourself the agony of coaxing a new flame from stubborn flint and steel. In towns, the risk of fire is terrifyingly real. Thatched roofs and timbered walls go up like kindling if a spark escapes. There are laws against lighting fires after dark, and the town crier will sometimes walk the streets at sunset, reminding everyone to cover their hearths. You hear stories of entire neighborhoods wiped out by one careless lantern or a runaway ember. For most, darkness is simply a fact of life. You learn to navigate by touch, memory, and moonlight. A trip to the barn or the privy at night is a tiny adventure. The shadows thick and mysterious. Every twig snap a possible ghost. Children whisper stories of night spirits, and even grown-ups admit to a nervous glance at the window when the wind howls. Yet, despite the cost, there are moments when extra light is worth every penny. Weddings, births, funerals, these events demand candles. The flicker of a dozen flames turns a cramped cottage into a palace, the golden glow reflecting in every face. Even the poorest family will scrape together enough to light the room when a child is born or a loved one passes away. There are lighter moments too, like the Festival of Candlemas when everyone brings their best candles to church to be blessed and carried home as protection for the coming year. Or the yearly visit from the tallow chandler, who buys scraps of fat and old candle ends, spinning stories and jokes as he works his trade. Children delight in the shadows cast on the walls, turning their hands into rabbits, wolves, or dancing maidens to the laughter of the whole family. You find humor in the darkness. Friends tease the neighbor who tripped and landed in the pig pen, or the child who mistook a broom for a burglar. There's always someone with a story about seeing a will-o'-the-wisp in the marsh, a ghostly light said to lead travelers astray. Some believe in such things, others just enjoy the thrill. Open debate still circles around how much darkness shaped medieval lives. Some scholars say people adapted, living in rhythm with the sun and moon, making peace with the shadows. Others insist that everyone craved more light, and that every new candle, every drop of oil, was a tiny step toward comfort and safety. You know from experience that both are true. Some nights the dark feels restful, a cocoon that brings you close to your family. Other nights it feels suffocating, full of worry and things unseen. There are fringe solutions too. Some villagers claim that eating carrots helps you see in the dark, a story that's been around a long time, though you've yet to meet anyone with night vision. Others swear by special moon charms or herbs burned at dusk to keep away evil spirits. The debate over the best way to chase off the dark is a favorite topic around the fire, and every family has their own answer. In winter the problem is worse. The nights are long and the sun weak, so you go to bed early, waking once or twice in the darkness before rising for good. Some use the second sleep, a break in the middle of the night to check the fire, talk quietly, or even visit neighbors for a secret drink of ale. You whisper stories to each other, your voices low and close, the world outside reduced to a hush of wind and the crackle of coals. In the end, the cost of lighting the night is as much about what you don't do as what you do. You don't waste candles, you don't leave the fire unattended, you don't go out after dark unless you must. But when you do light that candle, when you do poke up the fire and let the light flood the room, you savor it, every flicker, every shadow, every bit of golden warmth. It's a small luxury, hard-earned and never taken for granted. And so, as you settle down for the night, you tuck yourself close to your family, say a prayer for the safety of your home, and let the darkness do its work, restoring, humbling, and sometimes bringing you closer to those you love. In the medieval world, darkness is never just the absence of light. It's a presence, a reality, and sometimes on the best nights, a reminder that you can survive, and even find a little comfort with or without a candle. You're up before dawn again, not because you want to be, but because time itself costs something here. There's no ticking clock on your wall, no phone to buzz an alarm. Your time is measured by the sun, by the church bell, by the shadow creeping across the dirt floor. In the medieval world, how you spend your time can mean the difference between survival and starvation, and the cost of time is a constant weight pressing on your every choice every day. Your daily schedule is written by the sky. The rooster crows, the first bit of grey slips into the cottage window, and you're already moving. The day is short, especially in winter. There's not a moment to lose. You feed the animals, sweep out the hearth, and stumble outside with a bucket for water, all before the sun fully rises. Every member of the family, from the youngest who can carry a twig to the oldest who can barely shuffle, has a job. There's no such thing as a lazy day, no luxury of killing time. Chores aren't just about survival, they're about status and structure. In the manor house, the lord's steward keeps a close eye on the hourglass. In the fields, the reeve and bailiff walk the rows, making sure every hand is busy. If you're a craftsman in town, you measure the day by bells, matins, prime, tersext, none, vespers, and compline. Your guild might fine you for starting late or finishing early. Your neighbors know exactly when you should be at work, and they aren't shy about reminding you if you're slacking. You feel the time in your bones. Every task must be done quickly and well. Sowing, weeding, baking, spinning, milking, brewing, there's never enough time for everything. If you fall behind, even by an hour, the consequences can snowball. Wet laundry takes longer to dry. The best market goods are gone. The bread burns and the livestock wander off. There's no catching up later. You make do or you go without. Time is valuable because it's in such short supply. You're always balancing: do you mend your only cloak or help in the fields? Do you spare a half hour to visit a sick neighbor, or will that mean the bread goes unbaked and the evening meal is thin? Even the smallest choices matter. The line between enough and too late is razor thin. There's humor in the rush. You tease the village fiddler, always last to arrive at church, or the old midwife who claims she's never late but always shows up after the baby's born. Everyone has a story about the person who overslept on festival day, missing the best part of the feast, or the apprentice who lost track of time and showed up to market with empty baskets. But you also feel the sting when time goes against you. A rainstorm at noon ruins a day's haymaking. A sick animal takes hours from the schedule, the delay meaning one less loaf or a skipped meal. Some villagers say, the devil finds work for idle hands, but you know that idleness is a luxury you rarely have. Even holy days meant for rest bring their own work, extra church, fancier meals, more to clean. Historians still argue whether medieval people worked more or less than we do today. Some point to the dozens of feast days, days when work was forbidden and everyone rested, at least in theory. Others count the hours in the fields, the extra chores, the endless work of surviving without machines. The truth, you rest when you can, but you never forget what's waiting when the bell rings again. The cost of time isn't just measured in work. There's the time you pay for mistakes, a loaf ruined because you were distracted, a wound that festered because you didn't treat it right away. There's lost time too when you're ill or grieving, when the world seems to stop and the chores pile up in your absence. And there are stolen moments, rare and sweet, when you can sit in the sun, tell stories or just watch the clouds drift past. Children measure time differently. They beg for one more story or 5 more minutes before bed, as if time were a thing you could save up and spend later. You envy their innocence, even as you urge them on. There's always wood to stack, goats to chase, dishes to scrub. You hope they remember the bright afternoons spent playing, even if those days feel few and far between. Sometimes time itself feels like an enemy. There are never enough hours in the day, never enough seasons in a lifetime. You race the sun to finish the harvest before the weather turns. You watch the candles burn lower, measuring the end of day by the last flicker of light. You feel the weight of lost time, the years you can't get back, the friends and family who grew old or left before you had time to say goodbye. You find ways to bend time to your will. Some families share chores, trading tasks so that everyone gets a little break. Others pool resources, letting one person rest while another works a double shift. There are fringe traditions, taking a stolen Sunday in the middle of the week, or keeping time by stories and songs rather than by the church bells. The debate over the best way to spend your hours is endless, and every family thinks they've found the secret. Time is the currency of relationships too. You pay attention to those you care about. You listen when you can. You spend the dark winter nights sharing stories and jokes. There's a local proverb, time spent together is never wasted. You cling to that when the days are hard and the work feels endless. You measure the seasons like chapters in a book. Spring is a mad rush, ploughing, planting, lambing, patching everything the winter broke. Summer is a blur of growth, weeding, watching the skies for signs of hail or drought. Autumn is the harvest, the busiest and most anxious time of all, and winter is for rest, or at least for catching up on mending and planning for next year. There's a special satisfaction in surviving another year, and seeing the cycle complete and knowing you managed to buy another chance at life. You joke about wishing for longer days and shorter winters, about the miracle of getting through a whole week without losing a chicken, burning the pottage, or sleeping through the bell. There's always a neighbor who swears by some new trick to save time, using 2 spinning wheels at once, or milking the cow with one hand and stirring the pot with the other. Sometimes it works, sometimes it just ends in laughter and a bigger mess. Festivals break the grind of the clock. On those days you let time slip a little, dancing late, singing loud, sleeping in the next morning. For once, nobody cares if the chores wait, and the usual urgency is replaced by celebration. You remember those days as the best of your life, brief, bright islands of joy in the ceaseless river of hours. Still, most of the year you're racing time. You feel it most when you're alone at dusk, counting the hours left before the next bell, the next task, the next sunrise. You make peace with it, because there's no other choice. Open debate still circles among scholars about how free medieval people really were, how much time they controlled, how much was dictated by the Lord, the church, the seasons. You know that your time is never truly your own, but you carve out what moments you can. The song at sundown, the secret nap on a hay bale, the smile across the table. In the end, the true cost of living in the medieval world is paid in hours, rushed, lost, treasured, or stolen. You learn to guard your time as fiercely as your coin, to savor every free moment, to forgive yourself for what you couldn't finish. Tomorrow the sun will rise, the bell will ring, and you'll begin again, spending your days one precious minute at a time. There's mischief too, and jokes that linger long after the laughter has faded. The tale of the vicar who slipped on a goose feather, or the old maid who won the apple bobbing contest by cheating, but still lost her teeth in the process. Children repeat these stories for years, their giggles echoing through the village long after the original players are gone. Not all pleasure is innocent. There are tavern brawls, market feuds, and secret affairs that cost dearly if discovered. You know the risks, but you weigh them against the flat greyness of a life without excitement. Some people gamble, risking coins and temper. Some sneak into the woods for secret dances or forbidden songs. The danger only adds to the thrill. You learn to make do with what you have. If you can't afford a lute, you whistle. If you can't buy a cake, you bake one from scraps. If you can't afford to travel, you invent stories about faraway places and tell them by the fire, watching your family's faces glow in the candlelight. There's a phrase you hear often: a day without laughter is a day lost. You hold on to it, passing it down to your children, hoping they'll remember to seek out joy, even when the world feels heavy. And at the end of every long, hard day, you realize the real cost of living in the medieval world isn't just paid in bread or pennies. It's paid in the moments you spend chasing happiness, in the courage it takes to laugh, sing, or dance in the face of worry. Joy is hard won, but it's yours, and no lord or priest can tax it away, at least, not entirely. Now the candles have burned down to their stubs, and the night wraps its quiet arms around you. You settle in, breath slow and deep, as the hum of the village falls away. In this darkness, you can almost feel the weight of the days that came before, endless cycles of effort, laughter and hope, stitched together by the gentle pulse of time. Your body softens, aches fade, and the world feels for a moment smaller and kinder. Let yourself imagine the hush of a straw mattress, the faint warmth of embers, the distant echo of a lullaby sung through stone walls. Here you are safe from the hunger and the hurry. The troubles of the daylight shrink, and even the costliest worries feel lighter. The roof may leak, the bread may be hard, but now in this hour you are part of something ancient and enduring, the simple, stubborn spirit that carried countless souls through nights just like this. With every breath you sink a little deeper, letting go of the cold, the noise, the push and pull of survival. Tomorrow will bring its own burdens and blessings, but tonight you give yourself permission to rest. In the soft darkness, you join the company of dreamers, of workers, of families, generation after generation, who closed their eyes, trusted the roof above, and believed, if only for a moment, that all would be well. So, sleep now. The world outside is quiet, the story is finished, and the journey for tonight is at its gentle end. Sweet dreams, my dear.